Every game, every single one, should be an immersive sim. It's a crazy claim, I know, but also one I've given a lot of thought. Because more than any other genre out there, immersive sims focus on the things that actually make games interesting. Player agency, true immersion, systematic design, and radical realization. Without a doubt, the future of this industry. And today, I intend to prove it. For some of you watching, you might be asking yourselves after an introduction like that, what exactly is an immersive sim anyways? And what do I mean when I say all games should be one? Well, before I explain what they are and how every game can benefit, let me give you a quick example from a title I've been loving that perfectly encapsulates how much you can improve a genre just by tweaking things a little bit. And it'll give us a solid foundation of what I'm talking about with immersive sims as well. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. You see, what surprised me most about this game is that despite having amazing characters, writing, music, and sound design, none of those are what won me over. It's a fantastic game, by the way, I highly recommend it, but the real reason I love it so much is actually because there's something this game does that elevates it far above its main competition, that being Uncharted and Tomb Raider, which both do similar things that are great in their own right. However, it's the design of the newest Indiana Jones game that makes it shine. A focus not just on action-adventure tropes, but on the things that make immersive sims great as well. Everywhere you walk in game, any location you go, there are countless items everywhere you can pick up and use or investigate. Numerous ways to sneak into hard-to-reach places, and ledges to swing your trusty whip on to climb up. You can don disguises to get into enemy territory undetected, pick up small notes on the ground that spawn entire hour-long side quests, or with your own eyes piece together environmental puzzles that unlock secrets surrounding the game's story. Whereas most encounters in, say, an Uncharted game would see you oscillating between one linear set piece to the next with some high action sequences in between, Indiana Jones has no problem taking its time, slowing things down. But with this slower pace almost ironically also comes an even more engaging and thought-provoking design. Instead of just mindlessly shooting at enemies in a big forest while action music plays, most of the fights for Indy play out like small scraps at a bar, where you will be running through the environment frantically looking for shovels, hammers, or even food to whack your adversaries over the head with. It's a combat system that relies more on the fly problem solving rather than raw FPS prowess, and results in a game that makes you as the player think about your surroundings to solve problems, instead of just mindlessly shooting enemies before yet another cutscene unfolds. In fact, half the time you were playing the Great Circle, you were doing nothing more than slowly traversing around rooms, looking for clues, picking up keys and fiddling with them in your hands to find symbols, or writing down notes in a real-world journal to keep track of puzzle objectives. Or in other words, while many other action-adventure titles make you feel like a badass explorer, the Great Circle really makes you feel it, if that makes sense. It's the difference between seeing the Great Pyramids of Giza up close in first-person perspective as Indiana and looking for a way to sneak in yourself, and having a map marker leading you the whole way through with an annoying companion shouting in your ear the whole time. And it leads to moments like picking up a bottle off a shelf and throwing it at an enemy to cause a distraction, or crawling through an entire Nazi base camp without even being detected once, on edge the entire time. When you have game design focused around agency like this, you wind up with something really immersive that you just don't get in standard action-adventure titles like Uncharted, Tomb Raider, or even God of War. So much so that I remember multiple times playing Indiana Jones and getting so swept up in it all that I'd slow my gait and take in the sights around me like the Vatican, all because the world felt so real. As funny as it sounds, being able to pick up every piece of bread sitting on a table and throwing it at Nazis' faces makes everything better than even this. And yeah, I know this looks cooler, but trust me, if you actually sit down and engage these games for a couple of hours, the experience of actually playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is in a league of its own. an immersive sim light game masquerading as an action adventure. And the thing is, it's a perfect example of why every game should be an immersive sim, or at least borrow some elements of this highly underrated genre of games. Because even a somewhat mediocre implementation of immersive sim staples leads to a game that in many ways is just better, in my opinion. After playing The Great Circle, in comparison, Uncharted, Tomb Raider, God of War, and so many other games in a similar vein just feel like they're missing something. Not that they're bad by any means, by the way. They're fantastic in their own right, just lacking a special magic that Indiana Jones managed to encapsulate perfectly. The type of design that once you see it, once you experience it, you realize just how much games without it are missing. Almost similar to, say, playing at 120 frames per second on a high-end PC and then trying to enjoy 30 FPS games on a console. Impossible once you've opened that can of worms. Or said more straightforwardly, simply by incorporating design principles that are the cornerstone of immersive simulation games over the past decades, we can instantly make many games so much more than they already are. But I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, aren't we? After all, what is an immersive sim really? And how exactly do they make games better? As weird as it sounds, it's hard to pin down what the first immersive sim game really was. And that's because for a lot of people, even game designers, it's hard to describe what an immersive sim even is. Based on the name alone, you might guess we are talking about driving or flying simulator type games like iRacing or Flight Sim. But what the term actually is alluding to is something that is so much more than just a simulation of real life. Something that started with Ultima Online. You see, back in 1992, Looking Glass Studios released a game that would go down in infamy and change the course of games forever, Ultima Underworld. The title was special not because of cutting-edge graphics or roaring set pieces, but instead how the game actually played. Instead of being a standard flat 2D tile set with grid-based movement like any other competitor of the time, Ultima put players in a fully 3D environment, allowing them to jump, swim, and navigate spaces to their heart's desires however they wanted. But even more interestingly was what else the game let you do as well. Objects had real weight and could be moved, thrown, or rearranged. Light sources actually mattered for visibility, and this allowed for engaging moments where you could do things like put out the candles in an environment to help you sneak around. NPCs operated under basic behavioral rules rather than just scripted patterns seen in other games before. And quests were the exact opposite of linear, giving players freedom to tackle every situation in any way they saw fit, almost like a massive puzzle with multiple solutions that all felt fun. And what this really resulted in was an RPG that was not only engaging because of number crunching and story beats, but because every step you took through the world felt so immersive. So much so that this style of design formed the very essence of Looking Glass Studios going forward. And after Ultima, they went on to make many other famed series, like System Shock and Thief, which inspired an entire wave of copycats that improved the foundations, most notably the first Deus Ex. Regardless though, a new type of game, of design, had been born. And with it came a whole host of games that allowed players to flex their creative muscles unlike anything before. But still, now that we have the history, we need to define exactly what immersive sims are. First of all, while they tend to be first person, there are outliers as well, like Weird West. What they all do have in common is a systematic design first approach. Things in the world should not only look real, but be real. Items can have weight that is taken up in your inventory, for example, and you can then throw these items at other objects like lamps or glass to break them, or at enemies to distract. On top of this, most immersive sim worlds focus on non-linearity and world interactability. This means missions should be structured in a way such that players can tackle them from more than just one angle. Whether that be stealth, conversation, guns blazing, puzzle solving, or even ignoring the objective completely. And furthermore, the world should react believably and in interesting ways to whatever the player does. Think about how Baldur's Gate 3 takes into account so many ways we can tackle any situation in-game and gives us reactions from NPCs or the world that feel real and immersive. AI should be advanced and smart, giving players real challenges and systems that don't buckle under pressure when a player does something unexpected. The UI is often minimalistic, while the physics and atmosphere of the game are hyper-realistic, giving players the chance to intuit solutions through nothing more than common sense or a deep understanding of game mechanics. And most of all, behind any immersive sim is the crucial element of agency. At any moment while playing, players should have the power to make decisions for themselves. Instead of being fully backed into linear stories, what players do and how they choose to tackle everything in front of them is the defining feature of immersive sims, not cutscenes that always play out the same way. Or in other words, what immersive sims really are games that, as much as possible, relish in putting the power in the player's hands. In Indiana Jones, for example, I distinctly remember one moment in my playthrough where I had a gun I really wanted to keep for the next section of the level. But you see, the issue is that climbing up ladders or using your whip in the Great Circle makes you drop everything you're holding, meaning I wasn't able to keep the gun. But then I hatched up a plan. Because you can throw anything in your hands in game, I just swapped my gun into a melee weapon and lobbed it right over me, after which I was easily able to get upstairs and use my new weapon. You aren't supposed to have a gun at this point in the mission. You're supposed to sneak around and find things in the environment to outsmart your enemies. But instead, I felt like I had outsmarted the game itself. I had used all of the systems I had learned about in ways that they weren't even intended in order to solve a problem I had created myself. And man, is that a good feeling. Famously, in Half-Life 1, as another example, you could talk to scientists and convince them to let you through locked doors. And then, after you were inside, you could create a noise that would attract the guards nearby into the newly opened area, where they would then fight a horde of aliens waiting to attack you and instead kill them all, so you had to do absolutely nothing but talk and annoy people. In immersive sims, your most powerful weapon is never a gun or a sword or a bomb. It's your mind. In most games, developers focus on providing a tailor-made experience where they know exactly what you will see each step of the way. In fact, even in standard RPGs, this is the case. Sure, you can choose different options or go down varying paths, but these all are pre-planned and defined things that play out exactly how the developers wanted. Think Mass Effect and the Paragon versus Renegade systems, good versus evil. Sure, they give you different story beats and outcomes, and that's awesome, but any player that goes down the same path will see the same exact thing. You can kill or spare the Rachni Queen in Mass Effect 1, but the Rachni Queen can't decide to kill or spare you. She's a narrative beat, not a systematic element of the game itself with its own properties and rules. In my Half-Life example, that isn't what players were intended to do. You're not supposed to fight aliens in the sectioned off rooms of the top secret facility using the guards. But because of how much AI and systems are at play at any given moment, it almost becomes a playground of sorts where you get to decide what happens and create moments that literally no other player will ever see again play out quite the same way. And immersive sims are all about crafting experiences like this. Completely systems driven, with countless possibilities at any moment, giving players a huge toolbox and a simple phrase, have fun. It's like the difference between playing an RPG like, say, Pillars of Eternity versus Divinity Original Sin 2. Don't get me wrong, I love Pillars of Eternity, even more than Divinity, and especially think its story is so much more impactful. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't wish every second I was playing Pillars it had the immersive design of Divinity Original Sin 2. And that's because in Divinity 2, you can spread oil on the ground and light it on fire, kill important NPCs before a quest begins and completely change the outcome, or teleport yourself onto a nearby ledge to bypass the hardest boss in the zone. It's just so much more engaging playing moment to moment than in Pillars, where every fight simply comes down to using your spells at the right time against the right enemies. And it's actually a perfect example of why all games should be, or at least borrow elements from, immersive sims, because once again, it just makes them better as video games. If you were to ask a large group of gamers what their favorite RPG was, a lot of them would respond with Baldur's Gate 3. Not only is it very recent, but also just one of the greatest games ever made, full stop. But I don't think a lot of people actually even understand why that is. Sure, Baldur's Gate 3 is amazing in a lot of ways. It has memorable NPCs and companions, tons of spells and enemies, branching narrative choices, and a story that, while not perfect, keeps you on your toes the whole way through. But a lot of other RPGs have accomplished similar feats, sometimes in an even better way. The real crowning achievement of Baldur's Gate 3, what makes it for many the best RPG of all time, I think, is that it isn't just an RPG, it's an immersive sim. Rather than, for example, giving players a quest with a dialogue choice that branches the story in two directions, usually missions in Baldur's Gate are much more open-ended, like figuring out how to get into a devil's house to steal his belongings by putting down strange items on the floor in a seance, helping a woman trapped by a hag in the swamp free herself from damnation however you see fit, or most famously, deciding what to do with the goblins in Act 1. The actual reason people talk about Baldur's Gate 3 so much isn't the fact that the Goblin Camp had cool lore and brutal enemy encounters. They talk about it because of how many options you have to tackle this objective, one of many in the full game. For example, you can talk to the goblins and convince them to let you inside their fortress, immediately killing everyone. Or you could summon ogres you met at a nearby camp to massacre everything on site for you. You could poison the drinking supply so that they all perish without you having to even move a muscle, or flirt with an evil torturer to get your way. Objectives with this many options and solutions is what immersive sim game design is all about. And when you combine that with already beloved staples of the RPG genre that Baldur's Gate has courtesy of Dungeons & Dragons, you wind up with a product that is an enhanced version of something we have already seen so many times before. In fact, there are countless other ways in which you can approach taking out the Goblin Camp too, including siding with them and killing innocents, or astoundingly, building a mile-long trail of explosive barrels which you can set off miles away and blow up the entire Goblin Fortress with nothing more than a single spell and a lot of setup. Interactions like this, where players can truly come up with any solution to problems in their own ways, is what makes Baldur's Gate 3 such a masterpiece. The developers themselves probably never even accounted for something like this happening. They didn't create the Goblin Camp expecting some maniac to just blow the whole thing up with barrels and trivialize the entire encounter. But the fact that they could is what makes the game so special. And that's because from the ground up, Baldur's Gate 3 was designed with the principles of immersive sims, letting players do whatever they want, whenever they want, and reacting in a believable way no matter what happens. Rather than creating a mission where you get to explode barrels in a predetermined location, Larian simply added explosive devices to the game. And as with all items in the world, if you're strong enough, you can carry them or move them around wherever you see fit. And because fire will always make explosive materials in game combust, you can start a chain reaction by casting a low-level fire spell or even just throwing a torch or candle on the ground. Situations like this don't happen because they were tailor-made for the player. Rather, they occur because of the way in which the game was designed allows for full player freedom and expression, full agency. Instead of tackling objectives in game from the standpoint of set pieces and pre-established moments like most RPGs, Baldur's Gate creates a world with a set of rules that you can learn and master, which you can then use any way you see fit to do things that no other player had even thought of. Like another personal favorite of mine, stacking boxes on top of one another to climb up to hard-to-reach places multiple stories in the air that you otherwise shouldn't even be able to get to until much later in the game. That's what makes a game immersive, believable, and memorable. What makes Baldur's Gate 3 the type of RPG that both fans of the genre and detesters alike can fall in love with. A game that wears the mask of an RPG, but behind the facade is actually an immersive sim waiting to shock and awe. Or in other words, it's the key ingredient that explains why so many people fell in love with the title, at least I think. And don't get me wrong, I love the cutscenes and pre-planned moments too. It's fine to have those things, but crafting your entire game around the idea of having other moments with more agency as well makes you the type of product that people will talk about for decades. And you want to know how I know this is true? It's because one of the other most beloved RPGs that people love to gush about recently, Kingdom Come: Deliverance, does the exact same thing. In Kingdom Come, the entire world is built around the idea of being immersive and highly interactive. Sword fights feel realistic, you must maintain hunger, thirst, and sleep, every questline has multiple ways to tackle it, NPCs have complex day-night cycles that you must work around, traveling takes copious amounts of time even on horseback, and if you steal from vendors, they will just adjust their prices accordingly. The world truly feels alive and breathing, the type of RPG whose main character isn't the protagonist or villain, but the actual world itself, even down to the clothes you are wearing affecting the outcome of certain quests or dialogue chains, allowing you to disguise yourself as a noble or peasant alike to fit in. It's a style of game that never holds your hand, and instead puts all of the power and tools in the disposal of the player to use how they see fit, creating a world that feels wholly immersive every second you spend in it. For instance, in order to repair or maintain your weapons in Kingdom Come, you will have to manually press them against grindstones and keep them in good condition lest they break mid-battle. And it's just another example of how RPGs specifically benefit so much from immersive sim elements. It makes the entire experience more engaging moment to moment because you actually have to think like a character in the world would, instead of just turning your brain off and going through one on-rails corridor of fights to another while picking pointless stat boosts. And when you realize everything in the world feels real and lived in, down to maintaining your sword and general well-being, it gives you the perfect excuse to let yourself go and just get lost in it all. It's what immersive sims are all about in the first place. It's not that RPGs have to be immersive sims, it's that the ones that do borrow ideas from the likes of Deus Ex, Prey, or Control-Alt-Ego have a funny way of casting a spell on players. Immersive sims by their very nature tap into that childlike wonder within all of us, where the thrill of discovery stems not only from the narrative or dialogue choices that were set in stone well before the game was finished, but instead built from the systems in the game that commingle and collide, allowing us to make our own rules. And isn't that what games are about in the first place? That freedom they give us to express ourselves in ways we never could do in a movie or book. But you know, it's not just RPGs that benefit from immersive sim elements, but really any titles out there. And a perfect example of this comes from one of the best gaming YouTube channels out there, FranklyGaming. In one of my personal favorite videos of his, he talks about the outdated design of modern Rockstar games, primarily in relation to Red Dead Redemption 2. He brings up a ton of good examples that really hit the point home, but for me, two really stuck out. The first one was about the map in the game, and how much it ruins the immersion. You see, in Red Dead 2, despite all the signs littering the landscape that claim you can play the entire campaign with the UI off, if you actually attempt to do so, you will be scrambling to figure out where you are and how to get to your destination. Every landmark and the entire environment is designed around the idea that at all times you will be using your minimap to guide the way. It makes things convenient for sure, but it ruins what could have otherwise been so much more powerful. Jakey points out afterwards that in older Rockstar titles like GTA 4, you could get texts about cars on random street corners. And in order to figure out where they were, you literally had to take out a physical map that the game came with and look for it. Sure, things like this make the gameplay slower and quests harder to finish, but when you do, they feel so much more rewarding. I know this firsthand playing games like The Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and using the real in-world map to check for places to go when I was a kid playing the game after school every day. It's the difference between going to the next quest marker in Red Dead and doing nothing but staring at your minimap the whole time and listening to birds chirp, and simply following the flow of the wind in Ghosts of Tsushima. One game focuses on convenience, while the other capitalizes on being as immersive as possible. And that convenience does detract from what is otherwise such a deep and immersive game like Red Dead 2. Why is it that I can sit there and watch a meticulous animation skinning a deer alive for food and pelts, But then when it comes to traveling, I have to look at a gamified UI screen in the bottom corner just so I know where to go next. However, the even better example that Jakey brings up in this same video is about a random emergent quest he found after talking with a beggar on the street who he gave money to. The homeless man tips you off about a gambling ring happening above a local armory that you will be able to get some money out of. But when you go inside to the armory to try and find a way upstairs, you realize there's no options. If you quickly comb all around the nearby area, you'll find a neighboring house with a ladder you can scale to get onto the roof, after which you can jump across to find a door that leads into the hidden gambling arena. But when trying to open this door, nothing happens. And even worse, going downstairs reveals an NPC that has no actions, simply waiting and doing nothing. Because you see, he isn't supposed to get triggered yet, until you actually decide to play the quest the quote-unquote right way. The way Rockstar intended for you, for every player ever. You aren't allowed to go find a secret way in. You aren't allowed to scale the nearby buildings and beat the game at its own rule set. You have to play exactly how Rockstar wanted you to, otherwise nothing works. And this is the exact antithesis of not only what immersive sim games would do, but also what games should do. What started off as such a cool moment, where without even knowing it, a drunk on the side of the street tips you off about a cool side quest, devolves into a cookie-cutter, run-of-the-mill linear snooze fest. In a title like Dishonored, a game series fully devoted to the principles of immersive sim game design, this quest would have played out completely differently. You would have learned about the secret gambling ring and how it was at the roof of this otherwise inconspicuous building. But the similarities would have stopped there. In Dishonored, every single objective, any task at hand, can be solved in countless ways. You could use your blink ability to teleport onto the roof to find a secret hatch that needs a key to get inside. You could find the guard downstairs and trick him into giving you that key. Or you could kidnap the owner's brother and hold him for ransom while his friends freak out, or even transform into a small rat that could sneak beneath the floorboards and completely find a different way in. Imagine how much cooler that would be, how much more engaging the mission would have been if instead of having to play it exactly how Rockstar wanted to, you could play it how you wanted. Like, let me give you a very specific example from Dishonored 2 and how it's designed so much better. There's one specific mission partway through the game where you are tasked with breaking into a mad scientist's mansion in order to retrieve some secrets. But when you first step inside the building, you get trapped in the reception area, after which the main villain in the level comes onto the intercom and taunts you relentlessly, now aware of your presence. This means enemies are on high alert, rooms are harder to get through, and action happens non-stop. This is how Arcane Studios, the creators of Dishonored, intended the level to play out. After all, what's more exciting than a high-stakes heist mission? But you see, Dishonored isn't a modern Rockstar game. It's an immersive sim. If you react fast enough when that trap room is first triggered, you can actually look up and shoot out glass above yourself and catapult your body into a nearby attic area. And if you do this, not only do you discover a new area to sneak across the entire map in, but the main villain, the man who before taunts you and laughs, now doesn't even know you're here, meaning key cutscenes that usually play out are no longer present and the entire mission changes. That trap room in Dishonored 2 isn't a set piece. It's a systematically designed element of the gameplay itself, which you can outsmart at any point. And that's exactly what immersive game design is all about, not just being able to skin a deer realistically. And it's also the type of design that makes games so much more fun to actually play, rather than just look at and admire. Because when you know a game respects your intelligence to this level, truly allowing you to at many points do things that feel like you're breaking the game, it's a relief. That you can be confident in doing things that in any other game you wouldn't try. You can let your guard down and immerse yourself. Because the thing is, linearity stifles creativity. It suffocates it, squeezing every bit of air out of the lungs of games. I struggle to even think of examples where the Dishonored approach to mission design isn't just better than how Red Dead, Ubisoft games, or most modern AAA titles do things. And don't get me wrong, I get why they do them this way. Not only is it easier, but you can handcraft every moment, meaning the entire experience is more consistent and in the case of Red Dead, very quality. But you can produce that level of quality in immersive sim-style games as well. Look at Baldur's Gate 3 or Dishonored. Sure, they're insanely hard to pull off and are something many studios probably couldn't even do, but that doesn't mean they aren't better either, and that consumers can't want more focus here too. Not a focus on more story or writing, graphics and sound, all things that I love and that are important for games as well, but more of a focus on what makes games as a medium of entertainment so special, the agency and freedom they give us. And that doesn't mean I don't like linear experiences too. I mean, even Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, a game I was just gushing about, is very linear. I don't even have a problem with games limiting player choice. It's a good thing you have to play Cyberpunk 2077 in first-person perspective. The game is objectively better that way, I know it's an opinion, and was designed to be played in that perspective. The entire thing is ruined when playing from third person. Trust me, I've tried it with mods, and it's horrible. But when talking about a game's actual design, that's where things get interesting, where suddenly immersive sims reign supreme, and it's so clear. For those of you that have been watching me for a while now, you know that if there's one genre of games I have a vendetta for, it's Metroidvanias. But this hatred doesn't stem from the fact that I personally don't like most of them. That's just a subjective opinion after all, and one I totally understand why people disagree with. What actually bothers me about Metroidvanias, and the perfect tie-in for this video, is that I think they would be so much better if they learned a few things from immersive sims. Take Hollow Knight, maybe one of the most beloved Metroidvania titles out there. At multiple points in your first playthrough, you get a glimpse of a place called the White Palace. And even though you don't technically have to go here to finish the game, most players will want to. The pull to figure out what's going on is too strong. But the issue is, in Hollow Knight, there's only one way in. First, you must find the mythical monarch wings, which allow you to double jump, after which you can get into the palace grounds, and from there you must look everywhere you can for a very specific item called the Awakened Dream Nail, which can then be used in conjunction with a large amount of essence resource to unlock a secret entrance to the actual White Palace itself. It's an awesome moment that many Hollow Knight players relish in and think back to fondly. But you might be wondering then, what's the problem with it? Well, it's that by restricting the player, by forcing us down predetermined and boring roads of monotony, it makes the discovery feel so cheap. The White Palace isn't as much something we get to uncover ourselves as it is a hidden puzzle mechanic that requires us to do everything in a very specific order with no ability to step outside the box. By forcing players to follow the same way into the White Palace every time, you remove all the creativity, all the aspects of games that make them unique and interesting. If you have to get monarch wings or a specific item to unlock the next area, I may as well be watching a movie. I have no real agency. Another perfect example in Hollow Knight as well is all of the locked doors. In order to unlock any of these massive stone tablets, you must first meet the required amount of keys in your inventory, and this usually means a lot of backtracking or searching in random areas for things you've missed. Rather than letting players use the skills they have unlocked or a mastery of the game itself to move forward, instead we just have to look at this stupid door and mindlessly go around searching in areas we've already been while turning our brains off. When you give a player an obstacle with a clear solution, and a clear way to get to that solution, but still require them to go through the boring process of retracing through areas to grab keys, that's just not respecting your player's intelligence, it's wasting their time. At least give us new enemies or random encounters to keep things fresh and interesting while we're retraversing the same environments. Because unlocking doors in Hollow Knight isn't hard because I have to think to solve problems on the fly using my own agency to affect the game world in front of me. It's hard because I have to work up the willpower within myself to once again go through the same exact area with the same exact enemies to get to an item I already know is there, to get through a door which I already know what's on the other side. But Frank, that's what I like. I can already see a lot of you saying that in the comments. I get it. I love games like Path of Exile 2 and just farming the same dungeon over and over. But there, you are constantly getting new items, updating your build, and progressing. In Hollow Knight, you just do the same things you have already done to accomplish a task that you've already figured out. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Hollow Knight or Metroidvanias are horrible games. They just aren't for me. and it's fine to like this style of game design. But I do genuinely think that by incorporating and learning a few things from immersive sims, they could be so much better. Imagine if the doors we found could be blown up with an explosive skill we unlocked, or if every time there was a door, there were 15 other ways into a location that you could figure out instead. What if you could craft keys or steal them from NPCs, trick them into giving you hints on ways to open doors without them, or cut vines in the environment which you could then fashion into a lockpick? A Hollow Knight that's not only characterized by amazing music, art design, gameplay, and world building, but also deep systematic systems that can interplay at one another, allowing you to solve every situation you come across in so many genius ways. Something closer to, say, Animal Well and his bubble ability, which you can use to get to places you shouldn't even be very early on after unlocking it and mastering some of its advanced movement tech. And really, it's like the difference between building IKEA furniture with a step-by-step guide and creating your own design for a table from scratch. One feels rewarding and fun to make, but is shallow the more you look into it, lacking any ability for you to express yourself, while the other lets you tackle the challenge any way you see fit, giving you the full freedom to create something truly your own that you can be proud of. Games should be open-ended and immersive experiences, not just cookie-cutter instruction manuals that we have to follow step by step. Or in other words, Animal Well's bubble ability lets you be proud. Hollow Knight, well, just makes you feel hollow the more you think about it. Take a game like Prey, or its DLC Moon Crash, the most underrated game and DLC of all time, by the way, and the greatest immersive sim game ever made. Check out my video on it if you haven't already. I will always sing the praises of this game. In Prey, there are no doors you simply can't get through without a key. Every zone has multiple ways inside. Every door that is locked can be broken, sneaked around, bypassed, hacked, or even more genius solutions, like turning into a piece of food and wedging yourself between the crease at the bottom of the foyer. Or you could just go find the key and get in that way too. It makes the game so much more interesting to play moment to moment, because instead of finding a locked door or a zone on a high ledge that needs double jump and thinking to yourself, oh, I must have missed something, I need to get past this part. Instead, you can walk into any situation, knowing that you already have all the tools at your disposal you need, and the only thing holding you back is your own imagination, with no boring linear safeguards restricting the fun. Why should I have to backtrack through areas I've already been just to pick up an item I accidentally missed, instead of actually using things I've already acquired in genius and interesting ways that actually make you engage with the game on a more systematic level, which is so much more fun? When you walk into any situation knowing your imagination is the only thing holding you back, with no linear safeguards restricting the fun, that's what games are about. In fact, Hollow Knight and Metroidvanias aren't the only games that would benefit from this exact approach. Take another beloved title, Outer Wilds, as an example. In the Outer Wilds, the entire game is built around a mechanic where every 22 minutes the sun goes supernova in your galaxy, and you will have to start all the way over from the beginning, sitting in front of a cozy campfire. So the entire point of the game is to try to figure out what is going on in this strange universe, and how to stop the endless cycle of death from going on over and over. And while I won't spoil what happens in this story and how you get there, it's one of the best first playthroughs of a game you can have, by the way, for those of you who haven't played. But what I will say is that the way you get there is always the same. The keys to unlocking the biggest secrets of the universe leads you down a lot of different paths and through multiple puzzles. But by the end of the game, to actually see everything, you always must follow the same exact steps, done in the same order at the exact same times. And once again, don't misunderstand me. That doesn't mean Outer Wilds isn't a truly transformative masterpiece for so many that play it. It's just that it could be so much better too. What if every puzzle in the game, rather than being something like having to click buttons in a certain order, was more open-ended and less linear? In Prey, for example, you can get to certain endings of the game within 10 minutes of starting to play, simply by using items at your disposal in a cool way, like shooting freezing glue cannon ammo at a wall to make a makeshift staircase, instead of only using the firepower to slow enemies down like it was intended. But in the Outer Wilds, you never get any moments like this. Instead, on every planet and during every moment flying through the galaxy, things always happen in the same way, devoid of any ability for the player themselves to affect the state of the world or cheese their way through solutions in a satisfying way. Because even though this inability to affect the universe is part of the message of the Outer Wilds, that doesn't mean you couldn't include more interesting game mechanics to make it more fun and thought-provoking to actually play. When I think back fondly on playing other puzzle games like the Talos Principle, all the best puzzles come from the areas that have multiple solutions, or tons of different ways to succeed, new items and abilities that completely change the way you think. In the Outer Wilds, once you beat the game one time, there is pretty much no reason to play again ever, because the world is so static and the agency is so limited that you realize there is no universe to discover at all, just a bunch of stationary puzzles that can only be tackled in one way. Or what about Bethesda games? Could they be improved? As much as people love Fallout New Vegas, 3, 4, or Oblivion and Skyrim for what they are, there are so many points in these titles where something will happen like you noticing there's treasure behind a door. And after trying to get in and realizing your lockpick or hacking skill is too low, you simply have to give up and move on. Why aren't we given more choice every single time one of these things happens? Maybe a secret hatch where we can parkour onto the building outside like in the Thief games, a code or phrase that will unlock the lock instantly like some locked chest in Baldur's Gate, or spells and technology that we can craft to give ourselves multiple solutions to every problem like in Minecraft. Simply having a locked door with treasure behind it isn't enough. Everyone understands they have to unlock the door, and they also probably understand exactly how to do it. They just can't because their stat isn't high enough. That's lazy game design. It's only by giving players the ability to solve every problem in intuitive ways that any game instantly becomes not only more interesting to play, but the type of game you think about long after too. Or as the closer look pointed out, why are there spells in the Elder Scrolls like Transmutate that can literally spawn gold out of thin air, and why do they not affect the world at all? Things like this should be systematic in design, forcing entire economies of the world to find new ways of trade, where gold essentially becomes worthless and other substances that cannot be formed by magic reign supreme. Immersive sim design isn't just about having multiple solutions to problems or genius quest design. It's about creating a world that is actually believable and systems driven, that has principles and foundations that it grows upon. Places that feel like they'll live on with or without you. In fact, it's the whole reason people were so mad about Stalker 2 not having a functioning A-Life system on release. The whole point of the A-Life artificial intelligence systems in Stalker are creating routines and believable and realistic movements for NPCs, meaning whenever you are walking through the world, you might encounter a group of stalkers fighting off zombies which you can help. And then you can follow them on to their next journey for miles looking for anomalies, after which you can go into a nearby town and share a beer. While the A-Life system sounds like it's just flashy and for show, it's actually at the core and lifeblood of what makes the series special, because its systematic first approach to game design means no two players will have the same playthrough, and dynamic things will constantly happen that require you thinking like a stalker in the series really would. Or to put it more plainly again, the immersive sim elements of Stalker are what everyone loves most about that game. And really, the gist of it all, of this entire video really, is that a lot of what we as gamers love in the games we play, a lot of the moments we talk about between friends, or the stories we tell ourselves years later, come from the principles of game design first shown in the world of the Ultima series. Games that focus on immersion, reactive worlds, non-linear design, and thought-provoking encounters. These aren't tenets of just one genre of games. They are tenets that are at the very foundation of what makes games as a medium special, meaning all genres can benefit from their teachings. And that doesn't mean every game should be an immersive sim. After all, I love different types of games, whether that be slow, brooding narrative text adventures, fast-paced online shooters, or expansive open-world role-playing games. But every single one of these could learn a thing or two from the immersive sim genre, which for too long has sat on the sidelines with no massive hits of its own. But ironically, almost all of the big hits from other genres recently have found their success by incorporating immersive sim elements into their design, as we've talked about here. And I think that's because the world is finally on the verge of waking up to the fact that every game should have at least a little bit of immersive sim DNA, because immersive sim design creates the type of games that are worth playing and are great. And as always, thanks for watching.